Hey everybody, just making sure you can all see us here. Thank you very much for joining the first virtual New York Media Meetup. I really appreciate everyone making the time. I know there's a lot going on in the world right now. There's a lot going on in everybody's personal lives. So we are very grateful that you could make it here and that you've chosen to spend your time with us. Obviously this is the first time that we're doing this over Zoom. Please forgive us if there are any technical mishaps, but I think we will be able to make it work. So want to make sure that first take some time to introduce myself, introduce the meetup, say a very brief few words on what's going on in the country. But just to get that out of the way, I am JJ Colao. I run a PR firm called Haymaker Group here in New York. We work with technology companies like Etsy, Drift, Andy. We're a team of 7, always looking to speak with great PR folks. If you'd ever like to talk to us, so please send us a note. Before I started Haymaker, I was a reporter at Forbes, writing for the magazine for about 3 years, covered technology, startups, venture capital, that whole world. Started the New York Media Meetup in 2014, right around the same time that I began Haymaker. And if you are not familiar with the organization, we started a couple of years ago, basically organizing panels every quarter just to talk about the business and the craft of journalism. And we have a great panel lined up for you this evening. So just want to say a few quick words, and I want to make clear that these are personal and they do not reflect in any way the views of the panelists or their organizations, but I am speaking to you here from New York City, and there's a lot going on in the city in terms of protests, and I think rightfully so. So, a big part of the reason I live here and a lot of people live here is because of the diversity and the energy that comes with that. And a big part of that is the Black community here. Just want to say that we fully support the Black Lives Matter movement. We've donated to a couple of different charities in support of some of these issues. And you may have seen from the write-up on the Meetup page that we're supporting a charity tonight as well. So that charity is actually one that our company has been associated with for a while now, unrelated to recent events. But they are St. Vincent's Heart Share Services, and they work with children and young adults in New York who've been separated from their families. And most of those are Black children and young adults, and they provide tutoring and family placement, mentorship and employment services, and basically a supportive framework to help make sure that those children and young adults can succeed, both in school and well beyond that. So, in a very small way, you're helping with racial justice in this country right now. Obviously, we all need to do more, but I will leave it at that for the moment. So on to the panel. We have a really fantastic group of journalists with you tonight. And we'll begin with Molly Shiels, who's a senior producer at CNN Business. She runs a lot of their big interviews, had previously been working on live events. Obviously that's not happening right now, but I'm sure it will be back to full strength soon, Molly. We have Stephanie Davis, who is an Emmy Award-winning producer. She is currently the senior supervising producer at the Rachael Ray Show, where she has worked for 13 years, previously at Entertainment Tonight as well. We did have Hari Sreenavasan lined up from PBS NewsHour as well. He, at least for the moment, is suddenly unable to make it, but he may be able to join us later in the discussion, and we certainly hope that he can. But with that, we will get the discussion started. It looks like folks are already kind of chatting here, and at the end of our initial discussion, right around 6:45, we will get to some audience questions if you want to throw some of those in the chat. But in the meantime, Stephanie and Molly, do you want to maybe just set the scene, give us a sense of where you are right now, what your sort of work from home space routine looks like, who you're with, that sort of thing, and then we can go from there.
Sure. Molly, do you want to go first?
Sure. I thank you so much for having me, JJ, and it's so great to meet you virtually, Stephanie, and to talk to all of you. I live in Chelsea in a studio apartment, so my computer is dangling on a bar stool right now, and I'm on basically my only chair in my apartment. But I live in Chelsea, walking distance from CNN's New York headquarters at Hudson Yards. So the walls are closing in on me pretty quickly. I do have a shared rooftop though, so that has been a saving grace.
I very much understand, and thank you also for having me. I'm so excited to meet you all virtually and be here as well. I'm in Greenpoint over in Brooklyn, and I have a little bit more space, but I have an extra person. So my boyfriend and I live here in our apartment, and my studio was in Chelsea, where we taped the Rachael Ray Show. And so since the work from home started in March, everything became about the laptop and adapting. And so I've, moved from the living room to the bedroom just based on the background and, what I have going on. So also same thing. We have a shared rooftop as well. So that's been really helpful, but yeah, it's, I understand the sentiment.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do at this point, especially in New York. But I'm curious, maybe can you contrast that with what your day-to-day routines look like in the beginning of March when everything was normal, and maybe then set the scene for what they look like now?
Sure, I can jump in with that first. We are a daily 1-hour show. And previously we were taping the show 3 days a week, but taping 2 to 3 shows per day. And then we always had new shows to air 5 days a week. So Monday through Friday, I was in the office. We had full tape days on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays where we were taping all day long with celebrities and guests and Rachel's cooking and studio audiences for each individual show. And it was, coming into the office at 7 a.m. We would finish up in studio usually around 5 p.m., get back to my desk, write, prep, book, get situated for the rest of the days. And then Mondays and Fridays, we were really getting prepared, doing pre-interviews, bookings, writing scripts, all of the logistics for our show, which for us in particular, everything we did, our motto is very experiential. It's taste, touch, do, feel. So if we were giving somebody a demo, we physically had the product there. If we were showing somebody how to decorate, we built a room on set. If we're showing you how to roast a chicken, we're roasting chicken. So it was hands-on. So now contrasting, everything is being done remotely. We're very lucky in that the content of the show has translated directly. It's the same kind of content that we were providing when we were in studio. It's still the same kind of content that we're able to adapt to, a remote situation. The biggest thing for us, frankly, was Rachael. We have a host who came to the studio every day, and she is the linchpin of the show. We are not a news show. So without our host being willing to not only film from home, which for her home was her sanctuary. That was the one place in her world where cameras were off limits. And previously we've never shot in her home. She made the decision as soon as things shifted to realizing that, we could not be safely in the studio. She said, I want to film. I'm gonna open my home and also physically film it herself. We're not there. So she has been with her husband shooting all of the episodes that we are producing remotely. And so I do my job from my apartment along with the rest of our team scattered all over the greater tri-state area. And we work with Rachel, with our celebrity guests, with whoever the additional, experts and guests are on the show. And we do it all remotely. So we have no studio presence currently right
now. I'll jump in. Wow, Stephanie, I'm exhausted just listening to you. So I work on a variety of projects, as JJ was saying. We do have a weekly market show that we do every Wednesday. So we took originally 2 weeks off from that because we were in a control room at CNN. We were in a control room in New York, and we actually used our CNN International control room in Atlanta. So it involved 2 control rooms. And we had an anchor live on the New York Stock Exchange floor. That obviously was closed. We've never dealt with this before. So it took us 2 weeks, and we literally built a studio control room out of our technical director's garage in Connecticut. And another, the executive producer of the show also lived in Connecticut, has 3 little kids. So they built it in the garage so that they didn't have to, see each other, be within 6 feet, because they both have children. And we do everything now. We've created a Slack call that's our new control room. I also, 2 weeks before we were all working from home, I was helping out with Sanjay Gupta's coronavirus podcast, which just went from literally nothing and I think 5 people to one of the top 5 news podcasts. So they were just looking for people to help. So I worked on that for about 6 weeks total. So that was a totally different situation because I usually work on business news. But, it's like anything, wherever their help is needed, everyone raises their hand. So it's been wild to see how quickly everyone adapts, I guess. And Stephanie, to your point about Rachel saying, my home is my sanctuary, I don't want to film there. I think you just look around, and I couldn't even believe, like, we barely have makeup people going into CNN. And that sounds so silly, but people care about that. If you're on TV, this is how I look. I can't do my hair or makeup. And I just kind of like that it was more about what you're saying, and less about what you were looking like. And you look around and everybody looks the same. Everybody has the same issues. So that's, I think, made people want to try things out more and bend over backwards to get the news and shows out.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're both in very fast-paced and often, pretty creative roles. You're putting together something from nothing, from not much. And I imagine that the office environment is a big part of that in terms of interacting with your colleagues and allowing for both the serendipity and just that quick flow of information. Like, you're getting stuff done just by dealing with people face to face. How has it been to transition to a world where you need to pick up the phone, send an email, send a Slack, Zoom, etc.? Have you lost a step, or have there been ways to make up for it?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on the 2 key things. It's team collaboration and speed. Those are the 2 key factors that make most television shows successful. And when you take those away and suddenly you're trying to just even locate your team members, it was a challenge. I mean, those first 2 weeks, everybody was unclear what this timeline was going to look like. Molly, to your point about those 2 weeks of just figuring it out, we also got very lucky timing wise in a bizarre situation. We had a scheduled dark week, the week that in New York City, sort of the work from home, more serious quarantine began. And it gave us a little bit of wiggle room just to get our ducks in a row and figure out, what do we do? What's step one? How do we figure out the communication? Because you're so used to, I walk into a newsroom, my team sits 2 feet away from me and we brainstorm. You have ideas, you need something, you step 3 feet away and you can get answers from 10 different people in 10 different departments. And to your point about time, time is of the essence. And so that's been a huge, let me pause for.
No, go right ahead. I'm still fixing things.
Perfect. To your point about time, every minute does count in television. And so that, I think, has been the biggest challenge in figuring out how do we communicate clearly, deliberately, and efficiently when we don't have, we have some of those steps we need to figure out. So for us, it's really the Zooms constantly, which it helps to see people's faces. Not that we can't do phone calls, we certainly can, we email all the time, but when you're used to dealing with your team face to face and you're used to seeing them and seeing their expressions and having a, lively discussion about content, you need to be able to continue that. And so we are Zooming constantly. We're adapting to new technology. I mean, I think many people had never used Zoom until 2 months ago, and that's all I do now. So it's adapting and then figuring out the deliberate communication. I mean, for myself, I've learned over the 2 months when I need to set a deadline or when I need to give my team instruction or they need to give me instruction, what's the best method to do that? Is it via text and via email? Is it following up more? Is it setting a deadline that would have felt completely unrealistic 2 months ago, but now because everything is going to take longer, we just have to be realistic about the lead time that we now need. And so those are the changes. We're 2+ months in, and every day we're learning, and I'm making notes for myself that today this worked better than this did yesterday. But believe me, we're all adapting as we learn.
Yeah, that's great. And Hari, we're talking about what has been lost in terms of the face-to-face interaction and the speed and the collaboration that's often involved in putting together a television program.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to comment on that, but maybe before we get into that, do you mind just telling us where you are, what life has been like during work from home and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm in Jackson Heights, Queens, which is a neighborhood that's, unfortunately been in the press for the wrong reasons. It's about a 10-minute walk from Elmhurst Hospital. So this is a neighborhood that's kind of seen some of the worst of it. But look, lots of parts of the city have seen really the worst of it. So it's not, I'm not humble bragging about our horribleness. We have been broadcasting from here, my bedroom, for about 10 weeks now. And we basically had, right around when this was happening, we kind of, 2 or 3 of us, I was flying back on my last trip from California. I got in around midnight. I called one of my producers and I said, I think we should go to the building and do like a gear heist when we still can. And we carted out like as much gear as possible. And I took some home, he took some home. And that weekend we were basically expected to come back on TV, and we didn't have a control room and we didn't have a studio, and we've been doing it ever since. So in terms of what's lost, I mean, as huge a proponent of Slack and everything else that I have been over the years, there's really nothing faster than just yelling across a newsroom. I mean, do you have this done yet? Like, who has what? I mean, it's just, as Stephanie was mentioning, it's kind of like who is responsive on which medium. Some people seem to prefer text. And like right now I use Signal to communicate with one EP because that's where she lives. And then another one I use Google Chat to deal with 3 bookers and producers. I use Microsoft Teams to deal with one group. I use Slack for a different group. And then of course, like executives are still on Outlook. And you're just like, it's mind bending. And then there's some guys who just only pick up the phone and their voicemail box is full. So the reason I'm late right now is I'm also getting a minor in engineering because I literally took apart every possible element, checked which cable was doing what, connected this hip bone to the leg bone, and I'm back. But would I prefer to do this? No. I mean, there's professionals that get paid handsomely to just fix it. But in the past 10 weeks, I'm sure my colleagues here as well, we've had to troubleshoot because there isn't anybody that's going to come over and fix it for us. And a whole bunch of people are still relying on us to make air tonight, right? So it's there's a lot of things that I miss.
Yeah. So it hasn't been a piece of cake.
No, I mean, the commute's great, but I think, and I don't know whether we ever go back to the normal, but there's certainly, I'd say, I think it would be even better if and when school starts, because that juggling has been very, very difficult for, I think, a lot of us. Because this is just not I mean, we're all used to seeing that old BBC video of the analyst in Korea and his wife like crawling on her knees to get the kid, but that loses its charm after about the third time, and you're just like trying to stiff arm your kid out of the shot. So yeah, it's not all cake.
No, I hear you. Molly, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think people were surprised at how quickly we all adapted. I mean, I think all of us are surprised at how quickly we were able to do this. Like, I didn't think that things would be this seamless in a lot of ways, and they haven't been so seamless behind the scenes. But yeah, I mean, I'm a in-person, that's my favorite. I like having conversations in person and seeing people and grabbing a lunch when I can or a drink. And, I think those couple minutes before a meeting, the minutes after, when you're waiting for someone, like I miss that kind of collaboration. But yeah, I'm in constant contact with everyone I work with. So we're not missing a beat, but it's just, that normal interaction that you can't totally recreate.
Yeah. Molly, I'm going to stick with you for this one. And then we'll ask the group to chime in as well. But aside from the obvious being this global pandemic and the most recent unrest, nationwide, has there been a change in sort of the content and the focus of CNN's reporting that has surprised you, and that is maybe unrelated to everything going on, or
yeah,
I mean,
I guess I'll think about it for CNN Business, which is where I usually work. But when I was working on Sanjay's podcast and helping his team out, I mean, I've never worked with the health team. I have no experience there, but of course in breaking news, you can get experience anywhere and become an expert anywhere. Not that I'm an expert, but I think it was just things like he's collaborated with Sesame Street and things that you were like, this, what? CNN? But it's like, no, we want to talk to someone who wants to talk about your dreams. Why are we all having these weird nightmares? Or why are you so tired? Like things like that. I just didn't expect that we would be doing so much of, but I don't know if that's like a silly answer, but that's kind of surprised me, and it's held my interest, because not that I'm not interested in health or medical stories or news, but it's what we're all experiencing. So that was kind of interesting for me.
So would it be fair to say sort of less about businesses and the markets and more about kind of common, personal issues that people are facing, just given the last couple of months?
CNN Business, for instance, started a working from home, basically newsletter. It's called Work Transformed. And even with the podcast, with Sanjay's podcast, I think everyone was like, well, this isn't going to go longer than a month. It's still going on, and it's still hugely popular. But I think, people were like, what else can you talk about? And it's just like anything. Work transformed, this is what we're all living. It's not, we don't have a playbook for it. And so that's been pretty fascinating to me.
Right. Stephanie, how about you? I know, Rachael has a very different audience, and in some ways there's a straightforward application to what she does and how that is useful for people right now. But I'd be curious to hear, some of the texture around that.
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, with us, our show motto has always been, you don't have to be rich to live a rich life. So that's always the lens that we've produced from. So now it's this, strange world we're all living in, and that lens is more relevant than ever. And so once Rachael made the determination to film from home and open up her home, she films in sweatpants with no makeup and is cooking the meals from what's in her pantry and what was available at the grocery store, because that's what she has to work with. And so the relatability there has been so, I think Molly, you mentioned it earlier, you know, people feel connected to that because that's what everyone's going through. But it also, to your point about content, you know, it's lended itself to what can we do and what do people want to see from us right now? Because in studio, you know, certainly it allows us to do bigger, splashier things, have, you know, lots of guests, things like that. And it's not to say that those aren't really important elements of the show, but right now it's about getting food on the table. Those first few weeks, it was just people were in a panic over groceries. So let's cook what's in your pantry. If you panic bought and now you have 31 cans of chickpeas, we actually did an episode about cooking chickpeas because we were getting all these letters, all these emails from people who said we panic bought chickpeas. That was the one ingredient, that and lasagna noodles, that people just bought too much of and didn't know what to do with. And so is it to say that we wouldn't do those segments as regular cooking segments? Of course we would, but it's very much to the audience of what they need right now. And then to that extent, we're still doing celebrity interviews. We're still connecting with the talent who would be on our show, but it's in a much more intimate way. It's people that, you know, for example, we had Jose Andres, and who's on the front lines with World Central Kitchen. He's somebody that the interview wasn't bells and whistles. It wasn't a cooking demo. It was a conversation with Jose and Rachael about what people can do, what people need to know. And that was an incredibly meaningful segment. And then on the flip side, we had Julie Andrews on because she is opening up her podcast and her children's library to encourage kids to read, because everyone is home with their kids and homeschooling is so hard. And who better than Julie Andrews to encourage that? So, you know, we've adapted to what people are looking for right now. And then also, this is a really stressful time, and we want to provide people, we've always been somewhere where people can go, have the TV on, not worry, the kids can be in the room, they can just take a deep breath, watch some cooking, feel a little bit better. And so that's still been the goal of content.
Yeah. Hari, you're part of a pretty straight news program. So I'm not sure how well this question applies to you, but I'd be curious if there are any unexpected ways in which your coverage has changed over the last couple of months. Hari, you're on mute still.
My screen starts to disappear and then I forget that I'm muted, but I
All
always
good.
default to mute because of the sounds that very small people can make. Our focus, I mean, we're still a news program. We're still trying to get, you know, whatever the news of the day is done. And what's been interesting is, you know, there was a tweet that comes to mind that I read. It was like, how did a pandemic lose a 28-3 lead to racism, right? Like it was just like this, you know, because for those really 9-10 weeks, that was it. I mean, that was pretty much 85 to 95% of our news programs was somehow connected to the pandemic, whether it was about testing or international stories, et cetera, et cetera. And then here we go. It was pretty big. And to this point where we had a story meeting this morning and we were just like, I think that was the first 15 minutes that we've talked and we haven't had the word pandemic or testing in our conversation somehow. So, I mean, our focus is still trying to cover it, but we're also trying to figure out, well, how do we get the access to places? You know, our reporters have become a lot more creative and figuring out how to reach places that they physically can't get to. And then we're also trying to figure out, well, you know, quite a few of us are like, well, you know, when can we get back in the field? Like, let's go. I mean, I have certain interests and ideas and I'm like, this is a really big story that we should just be covering. I see obviously some of my colleagues that are out covering the protests and the unrest that's happening in the last couple of days and what kinds of health risks that they're taking. And, you know, have we sort of forgotten about all of those other things that we took very seriously until this story just really kind of pushed it open. So our focus is still to cover the news programs that's important or the news subjects that are important, but we're also trying to figure out how to do it in a very functionally different way. And frankly, like, you know, I hate to think that it's political of whether you believe that this is real or not, but some things that we're going to do in the field, if we choose to continue wearing masks for what we perceive as other people's safety, and if that's perceived as, oh my gosh, you're kind of a crazy liberal lefty who believes in science, it's like, so how do we inoculate those reservations, and when we speak to people, how we speak to people. So that's all the kind of transitional conversations that we're in now, because we know that we can't do this forever, but we also don't think that we're going back to, how we used to produce television the same way until lots of big structural things change.
I mean, that's actually a great segue to my next question, which, assuming that things get back to normal, God willing, sometime, who knows when, in the next year, let's say, what do you think will structurally change? What is not going to go away about how you produce your shows? I'll leave it there. And Hari, maybe we can continue with you.
So one of the things that really has to is just the cost structure of television. I mean, if you are essentially proving in these past few months, necessity being the mother of invention, yes, this is not optimal. And yes, I certainly don't want to be doing this from my bedroom for perpetuity. But that said, the kinds of costs associated with making television the way we were 3 months ago or 4 months ago, it seems pretty hard to justify. I think that there's still going to be an opportunity to create spaces and programs where there are multiple people and there are sets and lights and cameras and so forth in a shared space. But also it depends on the level of comfort of the people that are in the room. Like, let's say I go back to a studio. What if there's never going to be a guest that shows up there in person because of their own concerns for their health? Even if they believe that I'm healthy, what about everybody else that's walking around, the stage manager, the lighting person, whomever? That's a group of 10 people. We could all be asymptomatic. And there's no telling, even if you have antibodies, how long those antibodies last and whether you're prevented from reinfection, et cetera. I mean, until you have something close to a, solid vaccine, which again is a pretty loaded idea, I think there's going to be people that are concerned if they are living with immunocompromised people in their families. And it's a totally legitimate and rational concern for them. So why would I go to a studio if all my guests are going to be coming down via Zoom anyway, right? And have all of that cost infrastructure associated with it. Now, if there are, pivots that happen because of the economy and where advertisers decided to put their dollars, I mean, in public media, that's not as much of a concern for us, but I can see in commercial media some of these folks saying, wait, I mean, you're doing this from home, so why should I be paying you $2.5 million to make this program or whatever? So I think the costs are something that's pretty significant. I think the editorial access and how you end up relating to people is different. I mean, I can say for a newsy interview that's only 2 or 3 minutes, this works fine for me. I also do Aman Porn Company, which is a show on CNN International and on PBS. Those are 25-minute, 18-minute long interviews, and that's a level of intimacy that I frankly just really wish that I could read your body language right in front of me, right? Where that I'm interested in a question and you wind up your answer. Those kind of things don't really happen well on Zoom. If I'm making eye contact with the camera, then I'm clearly not looking at you on the screen, vice versa. So that's going to change. So there's going to be, and not to mention that I think what blogs did for text and what podcasts did for audio, this sort of COVID forced video production will do for video and television. Because at this point, I can use something like StreamYard for $40 a month and create the equivalent of a full show. And oh, by the way, that show can also stream live to Twitter and to Facebook and to YouTube and to LinkedIn at the same time. And I can take comments from all of those things and put them on the screen. Again, without a control room full of people or without a studio at all. So it's pretty massive what you can now, and you see a lot of sort of what would be traditionally, let's say Guy Raz, who has audio products, he's doing a lot of Facebook Live. So there's this sort of, I saw InStyle magazine using the tool, and that was actually a conversation between Jose Anders that reminded me, and Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's this is interesting. So, I think that there's a pretty big shift that's potential, and it was accelerated a tremendous amount. And our kind of marriage to specific location might dissipate a little bit. Oh, well, we're at these studios and at this city, and this is the only place we can make it. Well, maybe not. So I kind of am looking forward to it. I don't I don't have a particular skin in the game, but hopefully that means that some of the money that we save from the production we can put towards, I always think of it as satellites versus stories and salaries. So you can spend it on the production costs, or you can spend it on people, and you can spend it on content. And I would hope that maybe we can make these shifts and hire talented people and go tell great stories and worry less about all the crap that I just worried about to try to get onto this.
Yeah, that sounds like reasonably big structural change. A little bit more than superficial. I think it would be great just to go around the horn and Stephanie, see what you think.
To Hari's point, it's because we had to make a change, we all did. I think, none of this is ideal. I think the reality of this being the new normal, indefinitely, I think everybody would be terrified. I mean, I'm spending a vast majority of my time explaining to celebrities how to upload to Dropbox or how to log into Zoom, like hours of my day. And that's absolutely critical right now. I mean, that is the show. That is my job for those people and their content to be there. But it sort of becomes much, like we've all said, use of time and what we're doing and how we're pooling our energy and our resources. So the answer is, I don't know. I think we're all sort of waiting to see how things pan out. I mean, the health and safety of our staff, our guests, our audience is paramount. That's the only thing that matters. So the reality is, until we sort of have a sense of where things are going to play out from a safety standpoint, we're in a little bit of a holding pattern. But I also think in a good way, we know, okay, this worked. This was very challenging in terms of, what pieces and parts right now are sort of not as functional as we'd like them to be. And I think also it ripped the Band-Aid off a little bit. I mean, for us, we were a studio show. It's a very polished, I mean, as real as Rachael is, and we embrace the mistakes, and she lights bread on fire once a week, and believe me, we love it, but it's still a polished studio show. And with this, the reality is she can be cooking dinner and her laundry's going off. She's not going to reshoot that. That's how it works. We have our celebrity guests, and if one of their kids walks behind them in an interview, that's what we're all living in right now. And it sort of enabled us as producers to see those real moments in a very different way and not feel like that was a blip or a mistake. It's authentic to what's happening. And our viewers in turn have responded and really connected to that realness and sort of relatability. And so I think those are things we want to take with us regardless. Rachel's now let people into her own home. We've seen the spills, we've seen the mistakes, we've seen celebrities at home. So I don't think we want to remove that. And Hari, to your point about guests choosing to come to studio versus when they can do things on Zoom, I think it would have been unfathomable a year ago if a celebrity said to me, I can't get to New York. We would have not booked them. I mean, that would have been the way it works. And the reality is now, and frankly, down the road, I don't know that that's the case. I think if you have a story that we want to hear, that's okay. We as a society have now accepted this format. So I think those options will now be available to us moving forward, which I think is a real positive thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the things that I'm interested in, and Hari and Stephanie, I'm sure you've seen this, like in news, I don't want to speak on behalf of my company because we didn't have a specific policy, but not a lot of people work from home in news. And I'm sure in entertainment. And so, you are used to the kind of big cities of New York, DC, LA, maybe San Francisco. And I think that this is going to change that. I mean, our CNN business staff is spread all across the US and really the world. I mean, we have people in London and Hong Kong and things like that. But that's been really interesting to me, that change. Because again, we're all doing it so well that who knows? And it kind of makes me sad because people who live in New York, as you said off the top, JJ, love this city. They love the diversity. There's no city like it. So it makes me kind of scared and sad that it might not have the same mix of people as it did 3 months ago. But I also think it's really exciting to see what what lies ahead for all of us. And that's one area that I'm very curious to see what's going to happen there.
One of the, if you flip the coin on the other side, I agree with Molly's point. I also wonder about what kinds of opportunities it opens up for people who would be really good television producers that just happen to say, for my family reasons, I have to live in Cleveland or I have to live in, Nashville. Maybe that ends up changing the mix of how our content is created, because we actually have people living in all these places, and it's not this sort of like coastal elite media in California and New York and everything's up there. And, the other part is that one of the things that I remember, I was just on a call about this today, somebody who was kind of freelancing for us, one of the things that we perceived as that one of their shortcomings is that they were really very limited in their ability to come into the office. And we, at the time, was like, well, it'd be great if so-and-so was here, such and such was there. Well, at this point, like, we just ended up joining that person's world. And now we don't see that as a kind of a barrier at all. We're just saying, well, great. Well, maybe we just get that person into our team because we know that they're good at it. They just weren't good at showing up in physical space. Guess what? Like, they can show up in virtual space like us 100% of the time. They're a really good worker. We just never really, I don't know. I mean, we weren't discriminating actively against them, right? But we just, think about people with disabilities, right? There's just, no one's going to explicitly say, oh, I don't want to hire somebody in a wheelchair because that's against the law, et cetera. But there's these weird subconscious things. Now, if I know that this person, whether they're disabled or not, can get the job done, maybe it opens up this opportunity for them to participate in a national show of record or a national network or a national syndicated show, regardless of where they choose to live their lives.
Yeah, these are great points. So basically, the fact that if you are a 23-year-old trying to break into journalism and you cannot live in New York City on a $30,000 a year salary, that is no longer the filter that it once was. And that's a real thing, like having been a young journalist in New York City before. And that obviously skews to certain demographics. And I think, Molly, to your point, given the way that the industry has evolved over the last 20 years as well, we've seen local news really struggle, and the news deserts kind of become larger and larger as folks become concentrated in these big cities. And it sounds like part of what you're saying is maybe the pendulum is going to swing the other way a little bit, just because everyone is now going to be much more spread out, and the need to be in these media nodes is not as great as it once was.
Yeah, I mean, and none of us know what's going to happen. I don't know if there's a vaccine, by the winter. Okay, we're all going back to normal. But if I had a crystal ball, I don't think it's going to be that. I think it's already been so long, and just even my friends who aren't necessarily in media are talking about, where am I going to go? I'm going to go live in LA for the summer. I've always wanted to do that. I myself am going to go to San Francisco for a month, which I'm super excited about. And that's something that I probably could have done if I asked and laid out a plan, but I'm going to be getting up 3 hours earlier, and that's on me, and I'm happy to do it. But I think, you've got to look at the glass half full and do the things that you might never have been able to do.
Great. So I know we're getting towards the end of the hour here, and I want to move into some of the audience questions that folks have submitted via the chat. So these are sort of directed at individual panelists. So I'm going to be a vessel and direct them accordingly. Molly, we're going to start with you. And the question is, how much field producing is happening right now? And yeah, I think let's leave it at that. Sorry, there are a couple of different questions.
Yeah, I love traveling and going places, and I totally agree on while I don't do the interviewing mostly, there's nothing like being in the same room with someone. I don't think anyone can argue against that. But we are slowly doing things. My good friend Rachael Crane is our science and technology correspondent, and she was just at the Kennedy Space Center for the SpaceX launch. So that for me was so exciting I knew the producers who were there with her, and I was just so excited to see people outside of their homes, and I know where they are right now. So that was super exciting to see an event that I think everybody was just excited about that event, which was fun in general. But with the protests, you're seeing people, but I think most of the people that at least I know are in a city that they're already in LA, or they're already in Chicago or New York, so they're not traveling. But that's something that I'm really curious about too. I was saying, I think before we started, that our first live event this year was supposed to be with Richard Branson in Miami in March, and we canceled it a couple weeks ahead of time just because we were like, this doesn't seem like the best idea. And while I'm heartbroken, that was like a big area of my focus for this year. Look at where we are now. It could turn into virtual events, but I'm anxious and excited and very curious to see how traveling is going to change for stories. And we've been doing a lot less of it, but I don't think it's going to be eliminated. I hope not, at least. Safe travel.
Hari, that applies to you as well.
Yeah, I don't look. I mean, this is an off year for frequent flyers, right? I mean, basically, it's like a bye week. We don't have games. We're not. I don't think. I just don't have the confidence. I mean, I read a blog about how the newer Boeing aircraft recycle air so many times, et cetera, et cetera. And look, airlines are in this to make money. For the people who have flown to New York that I personally know in the last couple of months, none of them have had a middle seat empty next to them, right? They're going to put as many people on these planes as possible to try to break even. And as much as the tech as they understand, they're kind of a little still kind of leery and saying, well, what if the guy next to me was, he didn't intend to get me sick, but maybe he did. And that's going to take a long time to overcome. So the travel part is a big gap. I mean, maybe this means, again, like trying to look at that glass half full. Maybe I pick up more freelancers that are already native, right? Like one of the things that I didn't really like as much when I was a network correspondent at ABC and CBS is that we would literally parachute in. I mean, the first thing that I would do is I'd turn on like the most local radio station. I'd buy the smallest, teeniest local paper, right? Because those are the people that live in this community. They have all the things in the Rolodex. They know their kids play soccer with probably the primary source that you're trying to get to. It's just, they're there, right? So I mean, right now, like I'm much more intrigued by some of the smaller kind of independent outfits that are in Minneapolis or in some of these other cities that have the Rolodex already built in because they're related to this person or that person, right? So maybe that's an opportunity again for us to be harvesting people that are local talents that might have gone missed. But I don't think we're traveling at least the way that we would. I mean, we're asking all of our staff, it's really like up to their comfort level. I mean, from a simple liability point, I don't think any company wants that. I don't think also just on a human level, like you don't want to ever put somebody in a situation where they end up getting sick. And again, like we're relatively young and healthy people now, but we've all seen the anecdotal stories about other young and healthy people that have really horrible outcomes. So I just don't think that it's worth it, right? So if somebody wants to do that, and if they've thought this through and they really want to go to the SpaceX launch, then so be it. And that's your prerogative, and we're all going to benefit from it. But I'm pretty happy watching the live stream.
Yeah. So Stephanie, we're going to move to you, and this is some inside baseball, but it comes from Carlene. And typically, as we move towards the summer, a daytime talk show goes on hiatus. Do you think that Rachael's show will do that, or do you believe that this is an opportunity to continue because the content is so relatable?
So we do always have a hiatus every year. And so we are planning on continuing with our same schedule that we've done in the past with a summer hiatus. But what we've done is we're just going to continue filming until such point that our hiatus schedule starts. And we actually, even in past years, have always filmed shows. We would have new shows in July, things that we would film prior to the hiatus starting. So we're just having to get creative in terms of our timing and figuring out what's what. I mean, that has been an interesting piece of the puzzle that question actually raises, is we had shows that we had filmed in the 2 weeks prior to everybody returning home that had not aired yet. And so those were new shows that were completely relevant and appropriate on March 11th in the morning that on March 12th, we're no longer, our world had changed. And then certainly for, you know, New Yorkers, March 17th, all of a sudden we weren't leaving our houses again. So, you know, we had some of those new shows that we had to make a determination. Can we air those? How do we air them? What does that mean? And much like most shows, we've, you know, explained to our audiences this was taped prior to the COVID situation beginning. But yes, we are ultimately going to be on our same schedule that we've always been on, which is wonderful for the staff and for the team. Everybody's, you know, able to, you know, work and do what they normally do. We'll take our summer hiatus and then we'll return for season 15 as we normally would. What that looks like, much like everybody, is, you know, to be determined.
Yeah, that actually brings us to a point which could apply to anybody, not just folks in media, but I've certainly noticed that the concept of time off has at one point, you know, disappeared, and then it started to creep back into the conversation. How are you approaching that, Molly and Hari? And how are your organizations doing with that?
Yeah, they are very much encouraging us to take time off, which I think is good. And they're reminding us that we're not going to have some special rollover policy, which I think is also good. I don't think they want people to, you know, if we go back to the office in September, hey, I'm not going to be here the rest of the year. And I agree. It was kind of I was like, what am I going to do differently? But I do think it's really good to unplug. I actually took a few days off last week, and it's just really nice. And people I've found are they are anyway, but really respectful of, I got a call when I was off and they were like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I forgot you were off. And I think it's just really good to have that time to yourself and go for an extra long walk and not look at your Slack and your phone. And, you know, I just think for me, at least, it resets my batteries for sure. And that's when I'm most creative. I feel like when I can just walk and not be, you know, attached to something else.
All right. Oh, wait. I'm not on mute. Okay.
So I was going to say, I mean, I work weekends, so I never felt like I was off. But I would also say that I think I've worked harder from home, just volume-wise, than I have, partly because there was now no restriction on when I was available. They're like, oh, well, we know he's not traveling, so we know he has a camera. We know he's ready to go. So, I mean, I'm in Porn Company. I do some contributions for NewsHour Weekday. I do NewsHour Weekend. And then I launched a YouTube channel about misinformation and disinformation. I did a kind of a 5-episode like trial sort of a experiment around the coronavirus briefings called The Briefly. I mean, partly because it was just like, well, you're here and I'm here and we know we're not doing anything else. Let's do it. And, but yeah, I mean, similarly to Molly's, like, in fact, after that stretch, like 2 of my bosses saw my timesheets and they're like, well, you actually are forced, you will not come in for the next 2 days. I'm like, well, come in from where? Like, I'm here. Like, yeah, but just do whatever you want, but don't work today. And I was like, okay. So I think it's incredibly important, but I don't think, I mean, it's a lesson we're trying to learn in our personal lives as well, is that we're all kind of going through, I think, a low level, almost sort of depression and a weird, I can't put my finger on it, but you can see it in kids because they're much more honest with their opinions and they're feeling it. And you are too. I mean, it's not normal. Like this, like all of the micro expressions that I can't see on your face if we were sitting in person, right? Because the frames drop in the Zoom and we have Zoom fatigue by the end of the day. And so there's a lot of things that we're missing that, I mean, like, I'm not really a hugger, but I kind of feel like I'm going to be for a week or two when we get back to places, because I just want a connection with other human beings that aren't my immediate family that I'm sequestered with. So anyway.
Well, I think that's an appropriate note to end on. As bittersweet as that is, but thank you all for the time this evening. Really appreciate you giving an hour. I'm sure everybody at home is clapping for you. So I wish you all the best in terms of, you know, your various work from home situations. And I hope that we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
And everybody watching, thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Stay well.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.